This is the second video in the country ride. Thank you for watching. Welcome if you're joining for the first time. I am on the Windellama Road on my way to Windellama, and by the time we get to the end of this clip, we will have reached Windellama. What normally happens with these videos is something that I'm thinking about or have been thinking about for a while. I talk about it for a while and say what I think about it. If you like to listen, then you're welcome to do that, of course. If you just like to enjoy the scenery, then turn the volume down. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the future of personalised transport. By that I mean passenger cars and light commercial vehicles and so on, and I'll be talking a bit about electric vehicles. So if you don't want to hear anyone talk about electric vehicles, you're forewarned. Turn down the volume and enjoy the road trip. Before I go any further, I should say I'm not a scientist, I'm not an engineer, and I have no affiliations with anybody and no commercial arrangements with anyone. I'm not trying to sell anything here. I'm just thinking out loud about electric vehicles and the future of personalised transport and the things that I have read and thought about this topic for a little while. So let's jump right into it. If we think about motor vehicles, personalised transport, that is cars, bikes, light commercial, tradies, utes and so on, I think we have to accept that we'll always have those things. We'll always have cars and trucks, light tradies, utes to get around in. Think about the idea that we need to get from point A to point B, whether it be to our work or to the railway station or the shopping centre or whatever, or to visit friends and family. We'll always need some sort of personalised transport to do that. The flying cars of the George Jetson cartoon series of the 60s or whatever it was, they're not around yet, and even if they are ever around, it's not so much whether they're going to exist or not, it's what they're going to be powered by. If you think about motor vehicles and think about all of the things that we have invested in motor vehicles, starting off with the roads, bridges, tunnels, tollways, motorways, whatever you want to call them, we must have millions of kilometres of roads in Australia, and we've invested heavily in building them and maintaining them and replacing them and making them wider and longer and broader and dual carriageways and all that. So there's an awful lot of money has been spent on roads and associated infrastructure. Although we don't make cars in Australia anymore, there's still a huge industry around motor vehicles. That is, the people who sell cars, the people who service them, the people who repair them. And if you think of the aftermarket sales like Autobarn and Auto One and all those places, there's a huge business associated with selling cars and selling bits and pieces of cars. Add on to that the insurance industry, which provides you with your compulsory insurance and your comprehensive insurance. That's another layer of investment in motor vehicles. And then add on to that all the various government departments and agencies that are in some way or another connected with motor vehicles. We've got the government departments that plan and provide money for roads. We've got the government departments that make sure that your vehicle is roadworthy and registered and entitled to be on the road. And then we've got the police, who spend a fair bit of their time involved in preventing or prosecuting or fining people for various assorted motor vehicle crimes, from speeding and drink and drug driving to car theft and so on. So it's a huge industry, the motor vehicle industry, in one way or another, and I figure that we're always going to have it with us. I should say at this point that all of my toys are internal combustion engines powered by petrol, and I enjoy a good ride on the bike or even a drive in the car with some music as much as the next person. So the motor vehicles are always going to be with us. Now, if you think about if you live in a major capital city in Australia, be it Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, you know that the air quality in that city is not as good as it ought to be. And you know that that air quality is affecting your health and the health of everybody else that lives in that city. We've been talking about air pollution of some sort or the other for probably since the 70s. And we've talked about it and we've done little tweaks to it. We've not really been able to achieve a lot because the population's grown bigger, more cars have gone on the road, people are travelling further and so on. And so air pollution hasn't got any better. But on top of that, there is the issue of the climate change and global warming. Now, we can get into a debate about whether that's happening or not, but I prefer not to do that. I prefer just to accept that the science says something's happening to our climate, and the something that's happening to our climate is fairly serious, and we need to do something about it. Every major manufacturer of motor vehicles in the world has committed to somewhere between now and about 2035 phasing out the internal combustion engine from their fleet of vehicles. The fleet of passenger and light commercial. Like I said, the cars that you and I drive and the tradies ute, somewhere between now and 2035, almost every major manufacturer of motor vehicles is saying, well, we're going to keep making cars, we're just not going to make them with internal combustion engines. Some countries in the world have already taken decisions to say that beyond a certain date, we will no longer allow the sale of internal combustion engines vehicles in our country. The first of those, as I understand, will be in 2030, will be the United Kingdom. So what will happen there in the United Kingdom is after the date of 2030, you will no longer be able to buy a new car that has an internal combustion engine. So when you go to the showroom to buy a car, every car that will be offered to you will be some alternate fuel, either electric or hydrogen fuel cell or something else. I expect that all of the cars that are already on the road will continue to be allowed to be on the road, but you could also anticipate that over a period of time, the registration authority in every country will force those cars off the road by finding them unroadworthy, or finding that they don't meet emission standards or something like that. Now in Australia, we've not taken a decision like that yet. On top of that, we have no emission standard for our vehicles. In other words, they can put out as many particulates as they want, and we have no clean fuel standard. So there is a reasonable fear among some that when internal combustion engines are no longer be able to be sold in Europe, that some of those cars will be sold in Australia because they, first of all, will no longer be able to be sold in Australia, in Europe, or even if they were able to be sold, they wouldn't meet fuel emission standards or fuel standards. Now, governments around the world have said that by 2050 we need to be carbon neutral. Now, whether that's possible to achieve or not, I don't know. As I said, I'm not a scientist and I'm not an engineer, so I don't know whether we're going to be able to meet that standard or we're not. But I know that governments around the world are now working towards trying to achieve that standard. Some have committed themselves, some are thinking about it, and some are doing nothing. To do that, we have to make decisions, according to the various experts, by about 2035. Now, why that's important is because some people say that the average life of a car in Australia is about 20 years. So if, for example, you were to buy a new car this year, 2021, that car could still be on the road in 2041. Now, if we wanted to become carbon neutral, having internal combustion engines still on our roads in 2041 simply will not achieve that. Whilst it's true that cars are cleaner and more fuel efficient these days, the internal combustion engine produces emissions. And those emissions contribute to the greenhouse gases and the state of the climate and so on. The people who make cars want to be able to say to you in all honesty, and want the salesman to say to you in all honesty, that when you get in the car, there are no emissions. And technically that will be true. When you buy an electric car and you turn on the key or turn the engine on or whatever it is you do to get the car started, there's nothing comes out of the tailpipe. There are no emissions from that vehicle. Now, we know that at the moment, the processes that are used to make that car are not carbon neutral. So all the steel, all of the tyres, all the bits and pieces, all the parts of that car are produced in a way that produces carbon that ends up in the atmosphere. So at the moment, manufacture of that car is not carbon neutral. Further, if the car is powered by electricity, then in Australia at least, the electricity is not produced in a carbon neutral way. But the car manufacturer will be able to say to you, well, we make cars, we don't make energy. We only make cars. What we make doesn't produce noxious gases, fumes or pollutants. Electricity does, and if you want cleaner electricity, then it's up to you to do whatever you need to do to lobby your government to produce a cleaner, more efficient form of electricity. Right, so having established all those points, and you're welcome to agree or disagree with them, I think it's worthwhile to talk about what is or isn't holding up the adoption of electric cars in the Australian market. The first of those things is undoubtedly the price of the car. There are some figures that say that the average price of a car in Australia is between $35,000 and $40,000. If you think back to the time when we made cars, that would be the price of a Camry, a Ford Falcon, or a Commodore. To my knowledge, the only car that comes even close to that, and the only electric vehicle that comes even close to that, is the MG, which is $43,000. So that's somewhere between $3,000 and $8,000 dearer than the average price of an internal combustion engine car, and it's a small city SUV. It's also $16,000 dearer than the equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle of the same car. So you are spending an awful lot of money, $16,000 possibly, to be green. And that means you're going to have to keep that car for a long time, even allowing for savings on fuel and savings on repairs and so on and servicing before you recoup the $16,000. So price is a disincentive. Most of the electric cars that are sold in Australia are upwards of $60,000. That's before you add on the on-road costs. So, for example, the new Nissan Leaf that's just been released is $61,000. The electric version of the Kona, the electric version of the Ioniq, and the electric version of the Kia electric vehicle that's about to be released in Australia either this year or early next year are all in the $60,000 range. So that's a lot of money to pay to drive a green vehicle. You're going to need to keep that car for a long time to recoup the extra $20,000 or more that you may have paid over the cost of an internal combustion engine. So without a doubt, price is a factor. I know that in New South Wales there have been some incentives now offered. There are also in Victoria some incentives being offered to reduce the price, but those price reductions are less or are about $3,000, and that is in fact less than the GST that you pay on the vehicle. In other countries, for example in Norway, which is always talked about as the model for electric vehicles, they waive their equivalent of the GST. By the way, their equivalent of the GST is 22.5%, not 10%. In the United Kingdom, you can get a grant of up to $10,000 or £10,000 if you buy certain models of electric cars. In the United States, when you combine the federal refund and in California the refund, you can get a refund of about $10,000 on your electric car. When you consider that a Tesla is about 39,000 American dollars, that brings it well and truly into the affordable range. The incentives that we're offering in that space are at the moment insufficient. The second thing that affects the take-up of electric cars in Australia is range anxiety. In other words, people getting anxious about how far they can go in their electric vehicle. In Australia, most people drive about 33 kilometres a day. Yes, there are people who drive a lot further than that, and there are people who drive a lot less, but the average person drives about 33 kilometres a day. So even if you were to own an electric vehicle, you could drive it almost every day of the week and still have charge left in it to do the sports run on the weekend. But of course, when you got home at night, you'd plug that into the grid and it would charge up overnight. Yes, your electricity bill would go up, but your petrol bill would go down, and the cost of electricity per unit is considerably cheaper than the cost of petrol per litre. Electric vehicles, the range is increasing. Some are now promising 300, 400, 500, even 600 kilometres of range. Our problem is that when we go on holidays, we want to drive for 500, 600, 700, 800 kilometres at a stretch without stopping, even though we're advised to stop and revive about every 2 hours. So we want to be able to go for a long time in our cars when we go on holidays, and we want to be able to take the boat or put the caravan on the back, and we don't want to lose any power. Now, of course, that's unrealistic, because even if you tow your boat with your four-wheel drive these days, tow your caravan with your four-wheel drive, you're using more petrol than you would if you didn't tow the boat or car. So fuel consumption is less, the car is less fuel efficient towing the caravan than it would be without it. The electric vehicle will use up more electricity than it would if it wasn't towing something. The range is of the vehicles is increasing, but there's going to be a point where we're going to reach. We could add, manufacturers could continue to add more batteries or bigger batteries to the car, but the bigger the battery, the heavier the battery, therefore the car is heavier, therefore it needs more energy to move, and so forth. Some of the advantages of having a bigger battery are diminished by the fact that the car is heavier. Nevertheless, range is increasing. The third issue that holds back the adoption of electric cars in Australia is access to charging points. Consider first of all that at one point in Australia we had an estimated 20,000 service stations. Now we have about 6,000 service stations. Cars have bigger tanks, cars are more fuel efficient, you can go further without needing to fill up your car. In an ideal world, there would be charging stations everywhere and there would be sufficient, so you could pull in, charge up your car and drive out again. At the moment, some manufacturers are saying you can charge from 0 to about 80% in 20 minutes or so, but other places, depending on the type of charger you're going to get, you plug into, it's going to take longer. So charging stations, charging points are being rolled out all over the country all the time, some by government, some by motoring organisations like the NRMA and the various other state equivalents of those. But will there ever be enough? I don't know. So purchasing an electric vehicle is an expensive option. It's an option that you've got to consider carefully, and you might not want to think about buying one now. You might want to buy another petrol-driven car for the next time, and then the time after that you would be saying, now is definitely a time to buy an electric car because everything's been worked out and it's going to work efficiently, and I'm going to be able to get from A to B and tow my caravan and all that kind of stuff. So it's a complicated subject, but I hope I've laid out some things there that you would give some thought to. All right, we're coming close to the end of the video, so I'll say thank you for watching and thank you for listening, and we'll continue our discussion on some other topic in the next video.